Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to this session of self-improvement to the Quran series, which we began with the start of Ramadan. And the purpose is to remain connected with the Quran as far as possible. So we are studying passages from the Quran, selections, in fact, from the Quran, which relate to self-improvement and which have some message for us vis-a-vis our lives, and also some of the important things that we need to observe during this month. The passage that we're going to study today, in fact, consists of just one verse. It is Surah number 9 and verse 122. The words are, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً فَلَوْلَا نَفَرَ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٌ لِيَتَفَقَّهُوا فِي الدِّينِ وَلِيُنْذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ. It was not possible that all Muslims should have come out. But why did this not happen, that a few from each of their groups could come forward to obtain sound understanding of religion and warn the people of their nation about these attitudes they had adopted when they returned to them, so that they could remain secure from God's grasp? So this verse, dear viewers, is a very important verse in the sense that this actually details out the responsibility of the scholars of this ummah. And in fact, it is a strong appeal that it carries, that it's not possible for everyone to become scholars of religion, to have a deep understanding of religion and have a deep insight in religion, but at least a few people from each community should come forward and gain sound understanding in religion. This is exactly how we do in other affairs of life as well. So not always everyone becomes specialists in different fields. It is, you have to adopt one particular field in your life as your specialization. So the Quran here is also appealing to Muslims that some of them should become devoted to the cause of learning and scholarship, so that they are able to understand the book of God in its depth, and are also able to discharge their duty of warning people of the hereafter. So the important thing which is delineated here is that they should gain deep understanding of religion. The word tafaqquh, which is actually mentioned here as liyatafaqahu fi ddin, which means that they must have sound insight, a deep understanding of religion. And this, of course, would mean that they have a very good grasp of the Arabic language, because the Quran is couched in classical Arabic. And similarly, the Sunnah of the Prophet, these are the two sources of religion. They must have a very strong grasp. Obviously, Hadith as a secondary source, in which the Prophet ﷺ has explained some of the important areas of the Quran, and also the way he himself followed religion. So as scholars of religion, they have to have this very important grounding, in which they are very, very well equipped in the tradition of understanding the Quran. Now, the objective which is mentioned here is also very important. The objective is that they should gain sound understanding in religion. Once this is done, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ, that they should go back to their people and warn them of the hereafter, and warn them of the consequences of the hereafter. This is basically the verse, dear viewers, which is, I would say, the backbone of scholarship, the backbone of how erudition and high learning should prosper in a Muslim community. And as the verse very clearly says, that it's not the job of every person. Now, what the job of every person is, to have a basic understanding of religion. Every person needs to have a basic understanding of the Quran. He should be able to understand the Quran, if not directly, then at least through a translation. But he should also make an effort in this regard to understand the Quran directly. For this purpose, learning Quranic Arabic, understanding Quranic Arabic is just an effort that he can make, and able to acquire in a matter of a year or two of an hour per day of work. But this is something which is related to every person. But this Quranic verse is actually mentioning something over and above that, and that is not just having a perfunctory knowledge of Arabic and just a ordinary or common understanding of the Quran, a basic translation of what you would understand when you read these verses of the Quran. But it is more than that. لِيَتَفَقَّهُوا فِي الدِّينِ. Tafaqquh actually means to have a very deep understanding of religion. And when we say deep understanding of religion, we have to first of all accept this fact that the religion which has been given to us is not based on the emotional appeal. It's not it's not an emotional appeal that we are made or we are offered to actually understand and acquire. It is based on reasoning, it is based on intellect, it is based on an academic approach. The Quran wants us to understand its message, not just because it's something which God has said merely on the basis of that, but because whatever He has said is based on very sound reasoning. And because of this reasoning, we are also able to not only understand some of the precepts of Islam, but we are also able to communicate it to other people. So it's not a dogma. Religion is not a dogma. It's not something has been generally understood that you just have to believe whatever you are told. On the other hand, scholars of religion, they are people on whom you can depend, on whom you can rely on, who have a deep understanding of religion, to whom you can pose all sorts of questions. Thus, for example, the basic beliefs like belief in God, belief in the hereafter, belief in the books of God, belief in the prophets, belief in the angels, all these beliefs which have been mentioned in the Quran. Again, the word belief at times makes us believe, so to speak, that perhaps these are things that you have to accept come what may, and they are in the form of a dogma. I think anyone who has read through the Quran will agree to the fact that whatever beliefs Quran has presented, it has always substantiated them with sound reasoning. So when it asks us to believe in the hereafter, it argues in favor of the hereafter. It tells us, look, how you can look at your own self, your own conscience, your own human nature, the universe around you, and the sense of accountability that prevails in ourselves, which gives us this huge lead to the fact that there has to be a day of accountability, because if the creator of this universe is a merciful being, the way we know him through the Quran, then there is no way that he can let this world continue the way it is going, but totally unchecked. There has to come a day of judgment. Regarding his own existence also, we know that if we reflect on our own selves, we know that we have been created, we are someone's who have always come into existence. This is not at all we are not at all people about whom we can say that, well, it's just a coincidence that people have come into being, or there is a certain theory to it. It's something we all know does not hold well with any level of common sense and intellect. In a similar way, the fact that the Quran tells us that this is a book which has been revealed by the Almighty, again, you can see that this is something which the Quran deeply substantiates, tells us that had this book come from someone other than God, لَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا, you would have found a lot of discrepancies in the Quran. So you see the general way in which the Quran has presented its beliefs, for which it would hold us accountable in the hereafter. They are not meant to be dogmas. They are not meant to be purely things that you have to blindly follow. But in fact, they are something which are rationally understood. And not only they are rationally understood, but once you understand them, you feel as if they are a call of your own nature, a call of your own heart, a call of something that comes out of you. You accept them. You leap to accept them. And this is something you can clearly see, which gives us that confidence, because of which we can communicate this religion to other people. So it is this line of reasoning with which, if we are convinced, we can present it to other people as well. Precisely for this reason, Islam is a communicatable religion. It's something that you can present to other people on the basis of reasoning. And as far as understanding the Quran is concerned, understanding religion is concerned, we also have to understand that the text of the Quran is eternal. It is something which has always existed. However, interpreting the text is something which depends on a scholar. It's a human endeavor, and therefore the understanding that you might, as a result, have of the Quran would be different in case of different people. And this is precisely why we need to constantly review the Islamic thought or the Quranic thought that we come to know of as a result of interpreting the Quran. So interpretation of the Quran, since it always will be a human endeavor, it always was a human endeavor. Right after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ passed away, we know companions, they understood the Quran, they would have discussions and debates, they would have differences of opinion as well. But at the same time, this difference of opinion would be based on their own reasoning and on their own understanding. We find in the times of Prophet Muhammad, his beloved wife Aisha arguing with him, asking him questions, and at times furnishing reasoning for some of the beliefs herself, and discussing these things with the Prophet, giving rise to this healthy debate. So as a result of this tafaqquh fi deen, which this verse mentions, that you have to have that deep insight in religion, the key thing that every scholar of religion needs to develop is to have that free flowing dialogue available for people who come and ask questions to him or her. Otherwise, this would be a fruitless exercise. You have to understand the Quran, and this understanding is not just for the sake of understanding. It's an understanding to communicate to other people, so that when they come and ask questions, you do not snub them, you do not divert those questions, or you do not just discourage people from asking questions. So a person who's a scholar of religion, he will always encourage you to ask questions. He might not know all the answers, but of course, he would always try to answer these questions. And this is how the Quran has itself structured. So, yeah, the Quran is a book in which every time you reflect on it, the deeper you go in understanding the Quran, every time you'll find a new meaning. And every time you think that, well, I passed by this verse maybe some months ago, and I have understood it, I thought, but now that I'm reading it again and again, I find something new coming out of it. And this is the depth of the Quran that we all experience at one time or another. So this verse actually tells us that as far as Muslim scholars are concerned, this tafakkur, this depth of understanding, this insight is something which is going to be the hallmark, or which should be the hallmark of all scholars. Their deep understanding is accompanied with this humility at the same time, that in spite of having knowledge of the things which a person or a scholar would think that he has, he still is humble enough to admit at times when a question is posed to him and he's not able to answer, that he says that, well, I'm still searching for an answer, or I'd like you to come back to me, or I'll contact you again and give you the answer. So with this knowledge also should come that humility, because you see, not everyone, or in fact, no one can ever claim that he has answers to all questions that may arise. But the important thing is that this dialogue, this discussion, which has the Quran going, and which has the Quran, the feeling that we get from the Quran is that it's a book with which you can have a living relationship. That is only possible if this dialogue and discussion is kept ongoing. And when the younger generation especially approaches us, it is our responsibility and duty as much as we can to encourage all sorts of questions and be patient in answering them. And this Quranic verse also gives us that focus. It tells us that, remember, your basic understanding of religion is one, and that is, once you acquire this knowledge, your basic concern should be that you are always reminding people that don't forget about the hereafter. Allahum yahzarun. Don't be fearless of the consequences of the hereafter, because we are going to be held accountable. And when we say these things, remember that when people, they draw away from religion, or at times they are not comfortable in discussing religion, one of the biggest factors of that is that generally people are snubbed, or they are forced upon, certain opinions are forced upon them. They are not allowed to counter question. So in order to make religion, which is a living relationship with yourself and God and with the Quran, it has to be in a way that you are removing those misconceptions. These are thorns which they sprout in the mind of every discerning person. When a person thinks, the questions, they arise. So our duty is to understand those questions, and as far as we can, entertain them and try to answer them, because you see, the purpose is the same. Once these questions, they start arising in our minds, and as soon as they start being cleared, at the same time, our concept of the hereafter, our concept of the accountability of the hereafter, it shines forth as if you are even more clear than before, that yes, I will be held accountable for my deeds. So if I am intellectually unable to at the moment answer certain questions, I'm in the quest to find the truth. But in the quest to find that truth, my basic stress must never diminish, I must not lose sight of it, and that is that accountability of the hereafter. So a scholar of religion, when he answers all these questions and when he tries to encourage debate, his purpose is to clear the minds of people so that once again they connect it to God, they connect themselves to God, and once they do connect themselves to God, the concept of the accountability in the hereafter will always remain before them. So with this small discussion, we come to an end regarding studying this passage, and we can now open the floor for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I have Bismat Tirmizi. Bismat Tirmizi, you may go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. My question was, last night I was at an iftar and I was having a discussion on Islam with a friend of mine, and she's an intellect too. From my perspective, I said that I feel that Islam is a very easy religion. I was surprised to hear her say that it's a very hard discipline. And when I, prodded a little, she said, sometimes with the way life is, and she herself is a religious woman. She does, her namaz and her zakat and she's done her hajj. So she's a very, very, aware woman as far as her religion is concerned. And she said, everything is like there's so much accountability. If you lose discipline, God is always there to, nudge you back and say, you didn't do your wazu properly. If only we could sometimes just get away with doing tayammum and stand on the musalla. It kind of got me thinking, is religion a perspective? Or is it something which is factual, where sometimes a person who's more laid back can perceive it to be easy? Like for me, it's been very easy to kind of just, sometimes I feel that I will not be able to say my prayers if I do it extremely, do my wazu. I will actually do tayammum and get on the musalla and say my prayers. Now, is that wrong? Or is there everything is to be done right to the T, and then you're supposed to stand in front of God? Because in this very difficult and fast-paced life, sometimes, yes, we do, kind of slip and we don't do things the way we're supposed to do them. How are we supposed to kind of interpret this and conduct it?
I think all that you need to do is have a balance. There are two extremes. Either you are so fearful of God that you think that, well, every time that you do something wrong, He's just going to catch you and He's going to punish you. And this is a very extreme and erroneous conception of God. And the other is that you become totally slack and you just become an easygoing person and you think, well, everything will take care of itself. And even if I don't follow a discipline to do in any particular way, that would be fine. So I think it's the actual demand from religion is something which lies in between these two extremes, and that is that you just need to do your best and think that you're part of a religion which has certain norms. Consider yourself working in an office. What do you do in an office? You follow certain decorum. There might be a dress code. There might be some other forms that you have to follow. Like, for example, there could be certain timings. There could be a time to have a break, etc. So you see, just as you follow your routine in life, in order to become a little regimented, whenever you work somewhere, in order to achieve certain goals, it is essential that you follow a certain routine and discipline. But at the same time, this should not be something that overwhelms you so that you lose sight of the goal and you're always nitpicking and doing things that that they might be very, very ordinary things. So I think it's just a question of realizing that God is immensely merciful. He is, He's someone who would like us to do what best we can and not be afraid if we are doing something. If something is amiss, then always be ready to make it up if it is possible. And at the same time, also realize that that love of God, with that love also comes certain responsibilities. So I think it's just a question of taking things in their proper proportion, not going too tight, not just becoming too slack, somewhere in between. And more often than not, I would say that as your friend might be undergoing, there are extreme representations of religion from religious scholars, and the way they present certain things, they really weigh down heavily on our hearts, and we just become I mean, at times it's just nausea that comes overcome with which we are overcome, because we find that scholars, they at times go to such details in telling us certain answers, or answering our questions, that it's difficult even to follow that routine or that particular answer. So I think it's more to do with the way religion is presented by many scholars, and I think that needs to be revisited on more counts. And I think another thing that might be of benefit to your friend and to anyone who's undergoing this ordeal is that if you have a direct connection with the Quran, you'll never find that the Quran is telling you something and it's really weighing down heavily on you, because you see, it balances out everything so beautifully. If there are verses of punishment or verses which make you fear God, right adjacent to them you'll find the mention of God's love and His mercy and the paradise that He has made for all of us, and how He is actually affectionately wanting people to adhere to the truth. And if something goes wrong, He's not going to come after you unless you do something intentionally wrong. You see, God says that inadvertent mistakes, they are forgiven unless you really are arrogant, and unless you go to that extreme, you will be forgiven generally. So I think it's a question of connecting yourself to the right sources, to the right scholar, and to the Quran directly, which will balance out a lot of things.
Okay, so my question is, yesterday I was reading the sixth Sipara. I was in translation, the Al Bayan one, and from what I understood, there was tayammum was mentioned, if I remember correctly. Either it was the sixth or the seventh, I'm not sure, or it could even be the fifth. My question to you is it better to just do tayammum and say your namaz if you feel that if you are not going to, kind of in a situation where you're not going to make the effort to do wuzu, but as long as you say your prayers on time? Because to me, it seems that God
Yes,
is very kind and
I
very
would
merciful.
I would
That's
agree
my
with that.
interpretation of,
I would agree with that. If wuzu is to be done at the cost of not praying, I mean, if you're not going to do wuzu and that's not going to make you pray, but doing tayammum might lead you to pray, I would go for this second option. But at the same time, also realize that, well, there is a decorum that has been laid down. Okay, I can take some concession every now and then, but again, we have to conform to a certain discipline as well. But I would say yes, that if this is something that comes down to the fact that tayammum and or no tayammum is that demarcation which might make you pray or not pray, then of course praying is more important.
Yes, so basically it's showing up with sincerity in front of God. That's what's
Right,
most important. Okay, thank you so
right.
much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Nushaba Wasim, you may ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum. So my question is regarding prophet stories in Quran. Most of the stories when we read, they are always, their problem gets solved in the end. Which I study. I don't know, maybe there are prophets which problems are people they are not solved, but most of the prophets who don't have whatever they have problem, the problem is solved in the end of the story. So as a human being, as a Muslim, so we consider in the same way that our problem will get solved. But sometimes it not happen the way we think. And the way we read Quran, if we see the disease, it will over. If you don't have a kids, you have kids. So, how then we differentiate and how we teach ourselves to be more
You see,
connected.
you have to understand. You have to understand that prophets of God, they have a separate status, and they are, of course, not to be held analogous to common Muslims. But again, as I said, it's not always the end which is as important as the problem they might be going through. Look at what Prophet Job or Ayub actually went through. If you read the scripture of Job, which is Job actually, and you read it in the Bible, you'll find how the Prophet Job was afflicted with bodily harms, and there were insects crawling all over his body. He became totally decrepit, and he showed that patience, and ultimately he found favor with God. So don't go for the result. Also also look at the trials and the problems which they faced. Look at Prophet Muhammad's own life. Yeah, his Meccan life was full of trials and tribulations. His journey to Taif, we all know how heavy a journey that was, and how he was even inflicted with injury when he went there. How his own followers were also badly injured and wounded. So you see, a happy ending does not always mean that whatever a person has gone through should be overlooked. So prophets of God, they go through all sorts of these trials, and even then, look at some of the prophets that they were executed, like Prophet John, he was executed, and there are other Israelite prophets also who were treated very badly. So it's not always the fact that you would realize that prophets have a very easy sailing. Yes, prophets who become messengers of God, about them the Quran does say that they will always prevail, they will always succeed, but with regard to their mission. And that mission is to deliver that worldly judgment in this world. As far as their personal lives are concerned, they have all sorts of trials. Look at Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He lost his son, at a very, in both his sons, Qasim and Ibrahim, in infancy. He also had, he lost two of his wives in his own times, Zainab bint Khuzaima and Khadija radhiyallahu anha. Similarly, other things came his way in which he had to really, in his Meccan period, suffer through a lot. So I think it's a question of looking at things. As far as we are concerned, we all have to realize that prophets of God, whether they are prophets of God, whether they are common human beings, one thing which the Quran says is that all of us would be made to pass through various trials and tests. At times, these trials and tests deprive us of something, like, for example, we are afflicted with sickness, or maybe scarcity in resources, or poverty. All these things come to us, and at times we are blessed with a lot of things. Both are forms of trial. So I think the bottom line needs to be understood, that whether it's a prophet of God and whether it's a common human being, both have to pass through a series of tests and trials. The tests and trials of prophets of God, they at times are very severe. In fact, they are so severe that there is a verse in the Quran which says, Hatta zulzilu, which means that they were totally shaken. Like the word zalzala, we know that word in Urdu as well. So they were totally shaken, and they would say, Mata Nasrullah, that where is the help of God that we were promised? So this is, reading more, if you read biblical stories, you read the Quran in more detail, you'll find how they were subject to trials. Look at Prophet Joseph. He was in prison for several years.
Yeah.
Without any, he's totally innocent. He was thrown into the prison, and people forgot about him. And it was about after many years that the king realized, and that too because he saw a dream, and someone said, well, Joseph is there, and he can interpret your dream. Look at the trial of Abraham. He was told to sacrifice his own son. Can you imagine being told that after 86 years of your life, and you're given a son, and once that son turns 14, and you are seeing a dream in which you see your son being slaughtered by yourself. Look at Jonah, what happened to him, that he was punished, and he spent his some days in the belly of a fish. So I think it's just a question of looking into more detail. You'll find that it's not an easy sailing at all for the prophets also.
Mm-hmm. Sir, then how we differentiate between the pain which we get from that test and patient? If somebody hurt you, or you get sick, so the pain is there. So you feel pain, and then sometimes you cry. So how to compare the pain and the patient together?
I don't understand what you mean by that. If you mean that
you receive sometimes pain from the other people who hurt you, but you need to be patient. That God tell us to be patient. So pain is normal.
Well, as I said, pain is something which every person feels when he or she gets hurt. But God says that if you have my strong connection, you see, that patience is something which the Almighty has prescribed. And the Quran says, Wama sabruka illa billah. You cannot be patient unless you have a strong connection with God, unless you're God oriented, unless you have a deep link with God. So if you have to survive that hurt, you have to have patience. And the prescription to have that patience is to be close to God, is to have that deep God connection. So, it all goes in a sequence.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. In the interest of the participation of all the members today, I would really request participants to keep their questions concise. Symbol, you may go ahead now.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab.
Walaikum assalam.
Dr. Saab, I just want to know about a narration. I always tell my kids not to follow any scholar blindly, and I tell them the narration about Hazrat Umar. Then he was talking about meher, and he fixed it in a congregation or in a khutbah, and a lady got up from the crowd, and she said that how can you fix it if Allah didn't fix it for us? So she kind of challenged him. So I tell my kids that if you study Quran as Quran, you would have enough to live your life properly. And every time I tell them this narration, like I don't know the authenticity of it. I don't know how to check it. And then sometimes I tell them that fiqh and the depth is for scholars, but Quran would tell you enough, and it shouldn't be that you should follow any scholar blindly. So sometimes I feel that am I right about the authenticity of this narration or whatever, and if I'm telling them the right thing.
The narration is fine. I mean, it is reported in a lot of these books. But you see, the bottom line is the same that you have taught your children. I think it is correct, and that is don't blindly follow people for what they say. Always evaluate the arguments and the reasoning that they offer for a viewpoint. So it's not as much as the scholar as the reasoning behind a particular opinion which is important. So instead of relying on the scholar because you trust that scholar, if you go behind the reasoning, you will be much more connected, and that will also become something that is close to your heart, because once you know the reason of something and you find it to be convincing, you'll find yourself being attached to that directive even more. So you'll have a more living relationship with that particular directive, and something that will become a part of your nature as well. So yes, this is the right way, I would say.
Yeah, basically, sometimes I think about the lady, how learned she was, or because she knew Arabic, and should I tell, like, basically?
I mean, you see, it's just the lady thought that the Quran says that meher is with maruf.
Yes.
I mean, the Quran has said that, and all that she needed to know was that she understood that the Quran has said that you cannot fix meher. Meher is something which is according to the conventions of a society, and these conventions change with every society.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she just knew the Quran, and that's what she just uttered. And I think all that you need to know at that time is that if you know something for sure, you have all the authority and the opportunity to come out with it and discuss and debate. So I think this is just a example of how people in the times of our caliphate after the Prophet, they were so well aware of things that they would not accept things on their face value, and they would challenge people.
Yeah. No, basically, that's what I was always thinking. Am I like, sometimes I might just say things which I don't have the authenticity of. So now I feel better. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Yasin Fahad, you may ask your question. And as we are reaching the cutoff point of the program, this will be the last question for today. Rest of the raised hand, I would really like to apologize, and I will accommodate their questions tomorrow, inshallah. Yasin Fahad, please.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. My question is about, you're not supposed to pray during the Zawal time, which is like in the morning and in between Asr and Maghrib. However, I was reading Mizan, and I saw that, and I've known it otherwise too, that Prophet ﷺ said that if you get one rakah of Asr before Maghrib, it's like you have found the whole Salah of Asr. So if we are not supposed to read Salah during Zawal time, which is like 10 minutes before Maghrib, then how does this fit in? Like, I'm a bit confused there.
So first of all, maybe a slight correction. Zawal is a time in which the sun starts to descend, and that is around noon. And there's no prohibition to pray around noon. What you perhaps wanted to say was that at sunrise and sunset, these are the two times which are forbidden for prostration or for the prayer. So right at the time when the sun is setting and right at the time when it is rising, we are told that we should not offer the prayer, because idolatrous nations, they would worship the sun god at these times. They would regard the sun to be a god and a deity. And when it would rise and when it would set, they would worship the sun. So we are told that, well, don't pray very close to sunrise and very close to sunset. But you see, it does happen at times that you do happen to make an estimate and you think that you'll be able to complete your prayer. And also at times you are not very sure about the time of sunrise and sunset. So, I mean, it is on these occasions it is said that if you've started your prayer and you think that the sunrise has taken place or the time has come, or sunset is taking place or the time has come, then if you have gone through one rakat, then you can finish the namaz, your prayer, and it will be acceptable. So this is like just a concession which is given. And also, of course, which is going to happen once a person is not fully aware of the time of the sunrise and sunset. Because once you are aware of exact times, as we are today, because we have charts available, generally we don't go to that end that we pray right near the time. So we do have a couple of minutes still remaining. But this is just a chance happening. And the Prophet has just said that if it does happen, then don't worry. If you have offered one rakat, then your whole prayer is valid.
So does it mean that I am aware of the sunset time, but for whatever reason, I was not able to get to my salah till like maybe 5 minutes before, and I just want to do
yes,
it. And
yeah, you can do it. And remember, 5 minutes is quite a lot of time, because sunrise and sunset, I would say a couple of minutes before and a couple of minutes after that. That is the time that you should not offer the prayer. Otherwise, I think 5 minutes is a fairly okay time. I mean, if you offer that prayer, I think you will be able to offer the 2 rakat prayer, if it's the 2 rakat prayer, easily.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shehzad.